Today we managed to invite Jillian. Yep, she founded Vinta Inks maybe 2 years ago. Is it 2 years already by now?
Just a little over a year. Yeah.
Just little over a year. Okay,
Yes.
so I think she has already found many fans around the world, and I think there've been quite a lot of probably fountain pen magazines and people who are, whether is it like blogs who have tried out her inks and said a lot of good stuff about what she's done so far. So I think that's quite interesting for us to actually get her in and talk about her story, about the story of Vinta Inks as well. And she'll be able to share with all of us here about how she created it, why she created it, and what are some of the interesting CSR projects that she does with whenever we buy anything from her, right?
Yes,
So,
yes.
so she has interesting projects that goes on to help some charitable projects. So I think it'll be quite an interesting afternoon.
It all started because I love fountain pens, and I discovered them when I was a university student some years ago, not too long ago. So that's how it started. And then after college, after I finished my MA, I decided to take a break from my teaching job, and I decided to make notebooks. So I hand stitched notebooks and started selling them.
Hang on. So yeah, you are a teacher?
Yes, yes. I was a teacher in the Philippines, and then I'm doing my PhD right now in US.
So what do you
And
actually teach?
English lit. I think
Ah,
that's also why like a lot of the Vinta inks have stories behind them, because I think I love storytelling. So I think that's
great.
kind of related to it as well. So I started making notebooks, and then to my surprise, people actually bought those notebooks. and and so I decided to create an online store. And when that happened, I realized that I didn't just want to sell notebooks. I could sell inks and I could sell pens. So basically everything that was fountain pen or writing related. And and after I established that store, it's called Everything Calligraphy. We're an online store based in the Philippines. Um, a few years after that, I thought, why is it that we're always just importing things from abroad when we can make stuff and then share it with the rest of the world? And that's how Vinta Inks started for me. I wanted to have an ink that was proudly made in the Philippines, and this time around get to share our heritage with internationally, with Japan, with Korea, with China, with Singapore. And so right now, I think it's been an amazing ride for Vinta, because within that 1 year, 1+ year, we're now in pretty much all the major fountain pen markets like Japan, Korea, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Australia, the United States, and very recently, someone from France has started retailing for us. So I think that's
Oh,
very exciting. Yeah. So we're now available in the France, the United Kingdom, and Germany as well. So we were struggling to think of a name for our inks, and then my friend was on Google looking at different, Filipino artifacts and um, heritage pieces, and then she decided, why don't we look at this name Vinta? It sounds good, it has a resonance to it, and it's actually a boat. It's a sailboat that was used by pre-colonial Filipinos to travel from, because we're an archipelago quite similar to Indonesia. And so they were using those boats to travel from one island to another, and they were known for their very, very colorful sail. And so they were very sturdy, and they had a colorful sail. And I thought this represented everything I wanted for my ink, which is for it to be basically to take you on a journey of colors, but having that kind of Filipino heritage and Filipino background behind it. And so that's why it's called Vinta. Our inks are really formulated by someone who studied chemistry in college, and so it's very safe. It's We always test all of our products diligently. We make sure that it's wet enough so that it doesn't clog your pens. So it's the way I put it is that it's really made by people who use fountain pens, and so we know what makes a good fountain pen ink. Aside from being very passionate about Filipino culture and heritage and sharing that with the rest of the world, I also knew from the very get-go that when that when we start Vinta, we wanted to make sure that we would be able to give back to the community. So that's very much, it's not an afterthought for us, but it's something that has always been part of the process. And because I'm a teacher, or I used to be one, um, I decided to partner with Teach for the Philippines. I don't know if you're familiar, if Teach for the Philippines has a branch in Singapore, but it started in the United States, and basically, it um, gets fresh grads, and then they would train them to be teachers, and then they would send them to far-flung areas so that these students, wherever you are in the world, you'll have um, quality education. And so for every bottle of Vinta ink we sell, we donate um, 50 cents, 50 cents on US dollars um,
Yeah.
for that charity. And so
Okay.
so it helps pay for the teachers training. And last Christmas, I think Teach for the Philippines told me that they use the money we gave them to take the kids on a museum trip. So that was pretty cool. Yeah.
Cool.
Because again, we knew that we wanted to talk about the Philippines. We wanted to share our culture and history, but at the same time, we were very aware of the fact that it was an international market, and so English is kind of like the language that we're all used to, or at least that we can all speak. And so I wanted to have an English name and then a Filipino name. That way, both of them are accessible. So you can remember the color you like, but at the same time, you can read a backstory behind why this ink is called this in a Filipino name, and what's the story behind it. So, for example, with which one should I share? Which story? Which story is interesting? For example, Sikatuna. Well, someone mentioned that Sikatuna or Sandugo is one of their favorite inks from the Vinta line, and so that one is a red ink with a green sheen. So I knew that. So we wanted to call it Sikatuna because back in 1565, um, one of the Spaniards colonizers signed a blood pact with a Filipino datu, and that's a very important part in Philippine history and kind of started the entire colonial the colonization of the Philippines. So that's really how we did it. We would reference a specific um, Filipino moment or uh, a cultural event, and then we would name an ink after it. And so that way it will be a nice color, but it's also not just some random nice color, but there's a reason why it's called that. Because otherwise we wouldn't be able to differentiate ourselves with say Diamine or Noodlers that would just call their inks red or red
Yeah.
black or things like that.
The sheens that Vinta comes out with is pretty unique. So the contrast is pretty unique in a sense. That's why it's not just the usual blue with a little bit of red or red with a little bit of blue. Some of them are quite high contrast as well. So I'm not sure how come sometimes you came out with such wacky ideas.
I think the wacky ideas also come from the fact that I was going to talk about this later, but if you notice, unlike other ink brands, we tend to release in capsule collections. We don't just release random colors every month or so. We kind of have a certain obsession, and then we kind of build from there. Like, so if our second collection, which is, I call it the Carnival Collection, it all kind of circles around the theme of the carnival. So that's why the colors kind of make sense. The wackiness of it makes sense in relation to the fact that it's a carnival. So we have colors like mermaid green, cotton candy blue, or blue floss, things that way they make sense, right? And I think one of the things I'm really proud of is the fact that I think Vinta is one of the earliest brand that actually came out with a series of just pastel colors, which is quite a risk because generally before that, people tend to prefer the very high sheening, highly saturated inks. But surprisingly, people love our Carnival collection, specifically Aegean, mermaid green, violet. Yeah, so I was very much surprised, but in a good way. Again, the numbers are actually either very significant numbers in terms of Filipino culture, or it's a very important year. Like Leyte, 1944, actually looks back or pays homage to the Battle of the Leyte Gulf in 1944, which is the biggest naval battle of World War II, and it actually happened in the coast of the Philippines. So that's why the years are quite significant to us as well. And I just thought having that number added an element of distinction and class to our products. I mean, when you think about wine, right, you talk about a Chateau Latif from 89 or something like that. So that's what I was thinking about when I added the years as well.
Yeah, and some are like really old years, like 1955.
But there's actually, if I may just share, there's actually one there that's has nothing to do with Philippine historical significance, but it's more of a personal story to me.
Okay.
So Pink Sands, 1983, Santa Cruz. People are gonna get confused because even if they're historical buffs or history buffs or know a lot about the Philippines, they're not gonna make sense of this number because actually, it's something very, very personal. 1980, Santa Cruz is the street where I grew up in, and 1983 was the year that my father built our house. So to me, it kind of symbolized ourselves as second generation Filipino Chinese, our migration story and our culture and our background. So that's the only one that's actually personal there. The others are all have historical significance except for Pink Sands. For us, it was very difficult because we can't, even if we have one color that to me would look really stunning, we would have to wait for maybe a complete set of 10 unless we're going to release it in a limited edition. But generally, that's how we do it. We would have one ink that we like, and then generally we would build around that. So what other inks would complement that ink? So that's why the pastel range, it really makes a lot of sense because they're all kind of very similar in shade, similar in aesthetic, similar in design. So that's how we would do it. So for the collection, which Cityluxe is just about to carry, the Heritage Collection, that is our latest one, as opposed to being fixated on a very specific historical event like the Carnival era in the Philippines or the colonial period. This time around, we're focusing on Filipino architecture. So it's kind of like this play between nature, natural, and basically it's all about heritage. And so that's how we built the collection around the story of the kind of architecture that has been passed on to us by our forefathers. There are 3 collections, so we've released 3 so far. The first one is, I guess it's the original collection. It includes the bestsellers Blue Blood and Sikatuna, Cosmic Blue. And then the second collection is our pastel collection or Carnival Collection, where we have Aegean, Mermaid Green, and Violet as the bestsellers. And then the third, very latest collection, which we were supposed to launch like right at the heart of COVID, so March, so we kind of had to postpone it, is the Heritage Collection. So in this collection, you'll see a lot of browns and reds and a much requested ink, which is a sheening black. So we would have a sheening black for our Heritage Collection. Yeah. The undertone, once the swatches become quite clear, the undertone is actually gold, a little bit of gold and a little bit of blue. So, because actually, if you from a chemistry point of view, there's really no such thing as a black dye, or at least it's not very easy to find. So any kind of black ink that you see is actually a combination of different dyes to make it black. So depending on the manufacturer of the ink, for us, for example, the base is quite blue and gold. So yeah, it's kind of like white and how white doesn't exist, sort of thing. Yeah. I guess for me, it would be from I'll go through all the collections, but from the first collection, Blue Blood is the surprising bestseller. Actually, the funny story about Blue Blood is when I first told my family that I wanted to make inks, I said, I have no idea how to make inks. I don't know anyone who knows how to make inks, but I know that I'm gonna make inks, and it's gonna be called Blue Blood. So the first ever color was actually Blue Blood. I knew from the get-go it was gonna be called Blue Blood or Dugong Bughaw in Tagalog, but I had no idea how to do it. so so actually, the entire Vinta process took about a year and a half from the time I thought of this Blue Blood color all the way to when we launched it. But so that's the bestseller. But my favorite from that collection is actually the one that's a little bit lighter, which is Azure, because Blue Blood is more of a navy blue with a red sheen. Azure is more of a bright blue. So I like the brightness of Azure more. I think it pops more on a white piece of paper. So that's my favorite from the first collection, as well as, of course, Santa Cruz, which I named after our house. And then for the second collection, I really like Lucia and Aegean. I think for me, those two really were the standouts in that collection. And then for the Heritage collection, the latest collection, Black Onyx is the one that really is quite special to me, largely because it took us a very long time to get that color right. I mean, black is the hardest color to get any kind of distinction. So to be able to do that with the sheen, I think we did something quite special there. Yeah, that's why. Oh, and Macopa as well. Macopa is the other, mulberry is the other very special color in that collection because it's a red with kind of like a gold sheen. So if you're familiar with Pilot Iroshizuku's Yamabudo, it's quite similar. Yeah. One of the most frustrating things, I think, as a fountain pen ink user is when someone tells you that it's a sheening ink or it's a shading ink or it's a shimmering ink, and then when you start doing it on your own, you're like, why isn't that I don't see the sheen or I don't see the shimmer? So we wanted to make sure that that our formulation really, because the sheen comes out through the saturation level, for example, in the same way that the shimmer comes out through the amount of shimmer particles you put. So we wanted to make sure that even though it was more costly for us to do it, that we would make sure that there was enough saturation, enough shimmer, so that with every stroke that you put on paper, that you will see whatever characteristics we said it would have. Yeah.
I also noticed that when it dries, or at least when we are doing swatching, it can be pretty thick, much thicker than any of the other swatches I've ever done. It even can feel some like 3D layer on it kind of thing, as if I'm using some gouache paint instead. It's quite unique texture actually. So, but when you're actually using it, yet it's actually a wet ink. So I'm not too sure what is inside there that creates the thickness kind of thing, as if I could use
chemistry magic. Yeah.
So I don't know, is that something you intentionally did to make it thick when it dries up kind of thing, or it was just a by effect of what you've used inside?
I think it's by effect of the fact that we use very high quality ingredients and that we use a lot of those. So, I mean, all inks are pretty much water-based, right? But it will also depend on the amount of dye you put and things like that. So for us, it's always high quality and we put a lot of it. And that's why you'll see the characteristics. That's quite unique for us. I think that's across that's across all shimmering inks, not just Vinta inks. Yeah. And ideally you would use a broad nib. That way you'll see the shimmer more, and that it will allow the shimmer particles to go down instead of getting stuck in the feed. I've used them on demonstrator pens, even something as heavily saturated as Blue Blood. And so far, I haven't had any experience with it. And no one has brought it up with me either that it's stained. Sometimes they would say that the shimmer gets clogged in the feed, but that's normal. For staining, so far, I haven't heard any issues or problems with our inks. Yeah. One of my Japanese customers, he's a big fan of our inks. He actually gave me as a gift a notebook filled with like 50 different kinds of paper that he tried our inks with. And so far, I think they all pretty much did quite well. A little bit of ghosting in the back, but maybe it's because of the paper he used. Very little feathering as well, I've noticed. Yeah. For inks, there are three properties that people normally talk about. It's the sheen, the shade, and the shimmer. So how do you differentiate? So not all pens have all three. Some of them have several of the characteristics, some of them have none. But basically shading is when, let's say a blue ink, you'll see parts of it lighter than the others. So that's a shading ink. So lighter to darker to lighter. So it shades differently. When we say sheening ink, that means it's an ink that, for example, is a blue ink, but when you put it under the light, you'll see a different color like red or green or blue. So it's kind of like a shiny ink. That's why you'll see different colors based on the way the light hits the paper. And then the easiest one to distinguish is the shimmer ink, because basically it has glitters. So for us as well, I think one of the things that make Vinta unique is typically speaking, shimmering inks tend to use either gold shimmer or silver shimmer. But actually for us, we don't just use gold and silver. We use other kinds of shimmers as well to make the color stand out more. So for example, in Cosmic Blue, we tend to use a little bit of rose gold. So that's where the pink comes in, actually. And a little bit of copper as well. So that's also how we, that's also part of our trial and our trial process. We use different kinds of shimmer. The wetness and the dryness of the ink actually has to do with the saturation level. So if it's thick and then it doesn't flow very well, then that's what we would consider a dry ink. Some ink manufacturers suggest that you put a little bit of water into their ink. That way it's less dry. I think Noodlers offers. I think Noodlers, it's okay. You put a little bit of water. On the other hand, something like Diamine is generally on the wet side, so you don't need to add water to it. I would say most of them are actually wet. Yeah. Yes. The higher the saturation, the more the chances are for sheen to come out. But sometimes it can get too much that the ink's not going to flow. Yeah. Some countries like to have a very exclusive ink just for them. So I think in Singapore, if there's a color that you really want just exclusive to Singapore, I would love to hear what shade or what property you would love to see for that ink. Yeah.
Good questions. Can everybody type in what kind of color you think would represent a Singapore color, Singapore exclusive color? Yeah, because you all have been looking at other brands ink, then you all say, how come Malaysia also have? How come nobody do Singapore? Now's your chance to ask for a Singapore color ink. Please type in what would you want to represent Singapore ink. Your chance to do it. And Jillian is here who's willing to formulate something for us.
Yes, just exclusive to Singapore. Yeah. So Teach for the Philippines, that's the foundation that we support and that we're in partnership with. So actually I'm thinking as well, like to make certain colors specific in the future that not only benefits Teach for the Philippines or teaching, but also the medical industry, which is, I mean, just as a way to give thanks to, for example, in the Philippines, I mean, nurses are so hard stretched right now. Even couriers are so hard stretched. And so I think that's the next thing we would like to do, is to have a specific color, and maybe for that color, all the profits would go towards those organizations. I think that would be a nice thing to do as well. So for the blue blood, then I had an idea in my mind of the kind of color it had. Also for mother of pearl. So that was the second thing. I knew blue blood and mother of pearl, those two, they were very clear images in my mind as to what kind of color they would be. But for something like Carnival Collection, I saw so many variations of Aegean and mermaid green before we settled on the colors that we picked. Yeah. So the difference, for example, in the formulation is 0.1%, 0.2%. But I guess, I mean, we had to pick colors that make sense in the collection as a whole, but also can stand out on its own. So I think that's really the challenge for us. Yeah.
So like, I don't know, how many days or weeks does it take before you are
months.
Like happy?
Yeah, it's months to get something done like that. Yeah, because we also have to do testing. Like even if it's really good, then the next step would be to make sure that it's replicable across the many orders that we're going to fulfill, and that it doesn't just look good on Tomoe River paper, but also on normal copy paper. So those are things that we also take a look at. Yeah.
Okay.
We have an office in Manila where we do everything basically. So our inks are not made elsewhere. It's all in-house. Yeah. I just wanted to share with you other things that I've noticed people do with Vinta inks, not just in terms of straight up writing or for office work or for marking. So for example, this one, I think the graphic artist who did this used a combination of brushes and cotton buds and dip the ink in a little bit of water. Actually, if you put the Vinta ink with a little bit of water, then you'll really see the underlying colors. So for example, with Aegean, or Armada, which is one of our bestsellers, it really is a base of green and pink and purple. And that is how you'll see more of the shading when you paint with it. Other people, on the other hand, like this one, she's a painter and she loves using our inks for the shadowing. So this one already features black onyx. So she had a watercolor workshop purely using Vinta inks. So if anyone is curious, I can, of course, share her Instagram page with you guys as well. So this was the watercolor workshop that they did. So you only really need a tiny amount of the ink on a palette, and then they start painting with it. It's really fascinating, all the beautiful artworks they can come up with using our inks. So this is Iris. She's the painter I was talking to you about. So this was the workshop they did back in the Philippines. Oh, this was our launch party last year. So we did it in a cafe. Oh, and so this is an example of black onyx. Someone did a drawing of it as well, along with some writing samples from the serialdoodler.com. She has wonderful reviews about our ink, so please do check her out as well. So this one she also did with us using La Paz or bronze yellow, and then cosmic blue, which I think from our original collection, and then mother of pearl. She also did that. So there's really a lot of different things you can do with our inks. Oh, and this is Vinta Ochre from the Heritage Collection. So she loves brown inks, and so yeah, she liked this one as well. Yeah.
Does she apply purely directly with brush, or she uses fountain pen and brush?
I think it's both fountain pen and brush. And then
cool.
she does if you see the grid on top of the maple leaf, she also does a little bit of water testing. So the thing with our inks is that because we want to make it as safe as possible for all kinds of fountain pens, none of our inks are permanent or waterproof. That's something we're thinking about in the future, but for now, all of our inks are pretty much 90% water-based. So this is her kind of playful sketch of Sikatuna or Sandugo as well. So you'll see the green sheen come out as well. So there. Oh, and this one again from our latest collection. This is Vinta Terracotta.